Hey everyone, my name's Jace, aka Gemballs, and I'm the community manager at Gemballs. I had a good comment from people. I keep getting caught up with the whole community manager thing, so people said, just say you're the community manager of yourself. You're good. You're good to go. And I am a solo game developer here in Sweden, working on my little dream project, and I have no idea how it's going to go. I guess we'll see. Today, I want to do a bit of an update. I wanted to actually make this video and release it sooner, but things got in the way, life happened, and now it's a little later than I expected. But what I want to do is go over how things have gone over the past month and a half with development. So the last update video I told you guys about was that I was going to be developing some routine, and that a lot of the work that I had been doing had been like administrative business stuff, setting things up, getting the balls rolling, but I hadn't really done any game dev. So I wonder, how did it go this time around? Did I keep up with the routine? Did I, did we work on the game? Have we made progress? Let's talk about it. So the first thing I want to talk about is my routine, and did I actually stick with it? And I would say largely yes. I would give myself maybe like a B or a B+ on that. There were definitely times that I didn't stick to my routine or change things up a little bit, but for the most part, having that routine and giving me that structure for day-to-day stuff kept me going. It actually relaxed my mind a lot because I didn't have to think about so many things. Things just weren't so chaotic, and so that was really nice. I think that worked out really, really well for me. However, I would say maybe over the past week or two, things kind of downward spiral and just kind of fell apart. But I don't think it was necessarily because of the routine. They're just things that happen IRL that kind of just made things a little hard to keep on top of. And once that kind of started, they were specifically things that were making it hard for me to just be in the routine anyway. But I think that's okay, because despite that, I tried to stick with it as much as I could, and I still got things done that I felt like maybe I otherwise wouldn't have done anyway. So I'm proud of the productivity and what I achieved, even in the moments where the structure wasn't so strong. But I definitely felt the difference of what is it like when I have structure and what is it like when I don't have structure. And so a lot of my energy now is going back into, rebuilding that structure again, jumping back on the routine wagon and just getting that ball rolling again. And yeah, it's not a big deal that I sort of fell off. Just got to get back on. Just got to get back on the horse and ride to the sunset. So as for game stuff, let's take a look at it. Let's take a look at my game. Here it is. Check it out in all of its glory. Fantastic. Look at it. The sprite there, by the way, was donated by Frutchy. They made that while I was doing a stream, and they gave that to me. That's really good. And I did some of the animations. The terrible animations, that was me. But you can see this is what we have so far. And it doesn't look like much, but let's go through one by one all the different features that we have. So the first thing is obviously basic movement. I can walk and I can also run. Right now, the movement is really, really quick, but these values are easy for me to change and tune later. It was, learned the input system for Godot. Yeah. The next thing that I spent a bunch of time on was working with the tile maps, because I anticipated, since my game is going to be a top-down 2D pixel art game, I figured, there's a decent chance that I'm going to be using a bunch of tile maps. So I dove pretty deep into the tile map system in Godot, and it's fairly good. I got used to things like, how to allocate, custom collision for different tiles. You can bake those, there's a certain amount of information and data that you can put into tiles. So collision being one of them. Also, you can add custom data to those tiles as well. I'll talk a little bit more how I used custom data in the tiles in a moment. Also, another thing that I was looking into was terrains. And what this sort of means is that you can create these set of tiles that automatically get updated when you paint the tiles in a way that makes sense. So in this particular case, I just created some placeholder art of some road, of some walkway tiles with these nubby bits on the edge, right? And so basically I can just draw a square, and it creates a square with the edges already done in. And as I paint my tile map, it automatically updates the neighboring tiles to the appropriate one, depending on whether it's the edge or how, if it's a corner or whatever. I haven't done all the terrain tiles for it, so not every edge case is handled, but you can sort of see how this works, and that was interesting to dive into because it might be useful for me in the future. The next feature that I have in the game right now is asynchronous level loading, and what does that sort of mean? Well, it obviously means loading of levels for starters. So if I, move from one map to another, if I step on a trigger, it will load another level and we'll switch to it. But this level loading is actually done asynchronously. And what does that mean? Asynchronously means not in sequence, basically. So synchronously means you do things one at a time. Asynchronously means it's done at the same time in parallel with something else. What this means is that the levels actually load on a separate thread while the game thread just continues. And when the level is done loading, then the level swap happens at that point. And the reason that's useful is, when I trigger the
connection. Please try again later.
Wait, what the hell? How long was Siri talking? Where was I? Level loading. Okay, so thanks, Siri. Helps a lot. Maybe I want to fade the game out, show a loading bar. Those kind of things require the level to be loaded on a separate thread. Otherwise, they would freeze the game while the level loads. And you can't have an animated bar while the main thread of the game is frozen. So having the asynchronous level loading is going to be an important thing that I'm going to need down the line. So that's already sort of taken care of and solved. I've also got support for placing the character in a certain position, facing a certain direction, depending on where they're loading from. So, you can imagine in one level, there are many level load places. If you think of different doors that you can go into that go to different areas. If you're in a city, for example, there are all these different doors that you can go into. And when you come back out of the door, you need to load back in front of the door that you were on before, right? So the ability of specifying where you should load when you hit a level load trigger is also a necessary feature, and I have support for that as well. The next thing that I have support for is animated sprites. So like I said before, Frechi had donated the sprite. I did these really, really basic walk animation stuff just so I could test the animated sprite feature, and setting up an animated sprite was very, very easy in Godot. I just needed to import the atlas of my animation, and then I just basically call a function to play, walk left, walk right, whatever, and it kind of just works pretty good. Very, very easy workflow. One thing actually with the animated sprite in this particular case for these kind of games is there's actually obviously, as you can see here, we're not rotating the sprite or anything like that, right? So if I'm facing up, I don't say rotate to the up direction. I have to play a separate animation, an up hawk animation, right? And this becomes really tricky at the 45-degree angle, right? If the character is directly up and to the right, 45 degrees, what animation do we play? Do we play the right animation? Do we play the up animation? That's a decision that needs to be made and can actually feel a little bit weird if it's not quite a certain way. You might be wondering, well, I mean, how often is it that your character's going to precisely walk 45 degrees? And actually, the answer is that it's very common when you're using a keyboard, right? If I press W and D, that's up and right. That's exactly 45 degrees. So that case actually has to be handled. And so in this particular case, the decision that I made is to prioritize the previous direction. So if I'm walking up, and then I move to the right and I'm moving 45 degrees, I keep looking up. I don't just keep switching back and forth between two animations. That might get a little jarring. So that's the way that I've sort of handled this here. The next major system that I got up and running is some kind of workflow for, writing dialogue text for the game and also localizing that text and translating that text. So my game will have a bunch of dialogue in it. And so this is a really, really important thing for me because localization is something that I'm fairly passionate about. I love the idea of my game being available in multiple languages at some point in the future. And I know that, if you don't account for this early on, it can be a real headache later. And so I know that I was going to have a bunch of dialogue text. I know I'm going to have dialogue boxes in my game, and I know I want support for other languages. So I wanted to make sure that I had a decent foundation solution set up for this to make the workflow easy and to ensure that I'm not going to have major headaches later down the line. So I familiarized myself with Godot's sort of just localization, how to change languages, how to set languages, and it's fairly straightforward. Godot also has a way to automatically pull strings from script files and also from UI files and things like that, and create a localization file out of that. It has this handy way where you just select which files you want to include, and it automatically takes that stuff. Unfortunately, that doesn't actually support C# files. And only looks through strings on Godot files, Godot script, GD script files. So that meant that I would have needed to, if I were to have strings in C# files, I needed some other way of doing that. Luckily, Godot actually has a pretty easy way to extend that localization, string gathering, and the creation of a translation file, it has a pretty good way of extending that. So you can add custom functionality. And so I ended up creating a pretty beefy localization text parser and a dialogue text system that takes into account names of people, that takes into account plurals, that takes into account generic text that can be reused for multiple purposes, unique text that's done in specific dialogue situations, and this parser will gather all of that information automatically without me even having to specify the files in order, and then outputs all that into a translation file. It also has support for adding comments in the translation files as well, and so I'm really happy with where this is now. So when it comes to dialogue and things like that, I'll never make a mistake, I'll never forget to add a file. All of that gets grabbed automatically, it gets output perfectly into the translation file, and I've already tested it in translation software, and now I can actually very, very easily make translations. And then also I can switch the languages on the fly, so I can just switch from English to like Japanese or to whatever language very, very easily. And adding extra languages is very easy as well. I just need to translate the strings into another language, and then importing that is very simple. Like that whole process has been solved. Now there's one part of the process that hasn't really been looked into or solved yet, and that is fonts. Sometimes certain languages have certain characters, and certain fonts don't have those characters in them. So what happens in those cases? You might need to find like fallback fonts. I haven't looked into that yet, but I suspect that I should be able to overcome that in the future. So I will look into it eventually, but just not right now. Following on with the dialogue text stuff, another big thing that I've worked on is dialogue boxes. So basically what this just means is a dialog box that pops up and it plays some strings of text that has been fetched from my dialogue, resource system as well. Not only that, but the dialog box shows a nameplate if the character speaking has a name. So there's support for names. That name is also translatable, and also has support for a portrait if a character is a main character and has a portrait, and those portraits also have support for emotes. So if the character has a sad face or a happy face or an angry face, the dialogue system has the ability to switch between those if need be. I've also added additional support in these dialog boxes. For the moment, it's fairly rough, but it's there, and that is for scrolling text. So if for any reason more text needs to be displayed than what can be displayed, maybe this is because it's the only way to translate that text, because some text just requires more space, and it's so much more space than what was there before, then the text box can actually scroll to support that. Now, most translators can usually work around this kind of stuff because that's a restriction and limitation that they're probably used to working with. But this is just a catch-all sort of thing to handle those cases. But this is more specifically made in mind for if I want to have font size, font scaling feature in the future, like an accessibility feature, because some people might just need really, really big letters in order to read. And if that's the case, obviously I can't scale the dialog box to be the size of the screen. So instead, I now have this scroll feature. So if the text is ever too much for the dialog box, there's automatically a scroll feature that can be, you scroll up and down using up and down on the controller or keyboard, or W and S on the keyboard. So no matter how much text we have, we can display it one way or another in a text box. There are still probably some edge cases to how I want this to feel in the future, but that's just something to explore later when I have some more real world examples of cases that need addressing. One other feature, which maybe is an accessibility feature, but that I, really, really wanted because I love it when games have them, is a dialogue history feature. And that is that the previous dialogue that has just been said, in a conversation or whatever, can be viewed, because maybe you clicked too fast to go past something, or if you're like me, sometimes you read the letters that you're reading, but your brain is elsewhere, and then 4 dialogue messages later, you realize, wait, I didn't retain any of that information because I was distracted. And some games then have the ability to open up this dialogue history where you can go back and actually reread what happened, just to make sure that you can understand it. So I wanted this, the ability for this as well. I also wanted this dialogue history to be translatable and all that kind of stuff too, and work with the dialogue system. Getting all of this to work was an absolute pain and a real headache, but I did come up with a pretty decent solution, and now I do have a dialogue history system. It all looks a bit rough because I just need the foundation working, but it's there. Another foundational thing that I wanted to solve was the ability to walk up and down stairs in a top-down 2D pixel game. Now, you might be like, stairs, no big deal, right? Well, this is actually a big deal. In a top-down 2D pixel game, this is a really big deal, because you need to remember that there is no third dimension here. So how do we make you feel like you're walking vertically up something when you're not? And how do we handle like collisions with stuff that is below you when it's not actually below you? How do you handle all these weird sort of edge cases? And I did end up creating a system for this. So first of all, I created a bunch of ramps that you can walk up, and to give it the feel that you're walking up, if you just hold right and when you're walking up this ramp, or left when you're walking up a ramp, you also automatically go up vertically, and it feels like you're walking up the ramp. There's also support to dampen the speed of the character when you're walking up a ramp or stairs, so that it feels like you're slowing down a little because you're walking up, right? And that dampen factor can be adjusted. There's also support for this for vertical stairs. So if a stair is, running vertically down or vertically up, the dampening can happen in that case as well. And the way that I detect whether or not the player is on a ramp or not is I actually use that tile map custom data that like I was talking about before, where certain tiles will have information that they are a ramp and that they have a specific angle, which is the angle that we should be moving the character when they hold right to move up. So if it's a more shallow angle, I set it to a shallow angle, and then the character will just move, how it should on that ramp. And then also a dampening factor as well. So they can, so I can choose how slow a certain ramp should slow a person down when you're walking up it. I also have support for changing the Z index of the character, and what that means is their draw order, basically whether or not they're on top of something. So there's not really a third dimension, but there's like a draw order, and if something is drawn last, then it is on top of it, right? This created a bunch of issues around collision, like I sort of mentioned before. How do you collide with things that are below you when they're not actually below you because there's no third dimension? And I did end up coming up with a system. Unfortunately, Godot didn't have, I was hoping that it would have some way for me to set like a collision layer flag on an entire layer of a tile map, but that support wasn't there. Unfortunately, you can change certain things for layers of tile maps, but unfortunately not collision, which was a real bummer. I could have created a bunch of additional tiles for my tile map, which had different collision flags on them, but then I would have just been populating my tile map full of the same things over and over again, but they just have different heights, and that didn't really work either. So what I ended up doing was I created a system where I actually take the tiles that are around the player, and then what I do is I take the collisions of the tiles around my player, I reset those tiles to their original settings. Maybe they were already at the original settings, but I reset them to their original settings so they have all the collision that they would normally have. But then I go through those 9 tiles, and if those tiles are not on the same layer as my character is, then I delete their collision, basically. I reduce their collision poly count to 0, so no collision takes place. And so what that ends up leaving is only the tiles that are on my layer that have collision keep their collision. Every other tile from a different layer loses their collision. And so the effect is that I end up only colliding with things that are on my same layer. Well, stop, cut, backpedal. We're not doing that anymore. Okay, that's really slow. You may have even seen some frames dropping in some of the recordings, because it turns out that there was a misunderstanding. I thought I could update just the 9 tiles around the character. I can't do that. It turns out whenever I force an update, it forces an update on every tile. And I think when I tried to count in the engine, it was like 5,100 updates. So per frame, that's a little bit too much. So I have to get a different route. Okay. I talked with Chad a little bit about this, and I think the solution that I kind of landed on that I'm going to move forward with is going to be using multiple tile maps for each layer. So each one of those tile maps will have a unique tile set. And each tile set will have a different collision layer on it. And all those tile sets will share the same tile atlas, the actual art for the game. So I don't need to duplicate the art. I will just need to duplicate the tile sets and tile maps for every layer, and then set the correct collision flags on the tile sets. All right, we'll throw it back to Pause Jays. I think he's going to talk about NPCs now. Take it away, buddy. What do you got to say about the NPCs? And so I created an NPC and support for NPCs, and I just made them sort of just wander around. And this became an issue because I was thinking, well, how are they going to wander around? How do NPCs find a location to walk to? How do they path find to that location? This is usually fairly straightforward or fairly solved, these kinds of issues of like path finding and taking collision into account. But this really, really, really breaks down in a 2D setting where there is actually the illusion of a third dimension, but not an actual third dimension. Finding a path in that case using like a nav mesh or something like that, like it's hard to know what to do. I'm sure there might be a solution for it, but I think it would be very, very complicated. And I thought that the easier solution, which actually is probably all I need anyway, maybe I don't need that kind of complex pathfinding. Maybe all I need is just some characters to have waypoints, right? Certain characters walk in certain places, certain circles or whatever. They don't need to be able to walk everywhere. They don't even need collision. They just need waypoints to like dictate where they go. You know, they shouldn't need collision with the terrain, right? They just need collision with me, the character. And so that's what I did. I ended up coming up with a little system here to create waypoints. The character picks a point of interest, and using their waypoint chain creates a path to get to the point of interest, and then they just kind of walk there, and then they chill while they're there. Maybe further down the line, we can have them do a certain action, a certain animation. Maybe they stay for a certain amount of time, and that kind of thing. But then this also begs the question, well, all right, how do we change my layer then? And how do we change the NPC's layer if we're walking up a ramp or something like that? And I just basically made these little collision boxes that when I touch them, if I'm on one side of the collision box, my Z index, my collision layer, all that kind of information, the relevant stuff I need to make this work, gets updated to a new layer, or the higher layer or the lower layer. And it only ever works if you are either on the higher layer or the lower layer. If there are multiple layers and you're on top of it and you're too far away, then that whole trigger system doesn't really work in that case. So that's how that works. Both the NPC and the main character use that to switch their layers, and that seems to work fairly well. And it works good with the waypoint system too. One last thing, actually something that I forgot to mention and even forgot to put in my script, is that I have basic interaction as well. So like I can talk to certain things. I have a pretty rough system in place where I can create custom functionality. If I interact with something and it's an interactable object, I can call a custom function somewhere to push some dialogue or do whatever. And then one last thing that I'll talk about is, for a lot of these things, a lot of my effort went into not just making things work, but trying to create good workflows for these systems. So the dialogue system, I'm going to be writing a lot of dialogue. So it needs to be easy for me to like paste dialogue in from like my script, or updating or finding problematic dialogue, things like that. Or like the translation, being able to collect all the dialogue in the game and making sure they're all of it is in the translation document, making that not error prone. All of these kind of things, I made sure I put a lot of effort into making sure that workflow felt nice to me to work with it. So far, it seems pretty good. It's a little janky, and I think it would be confusing if I had a team of people, but the fact that it's just me working with it, the workflow of switching layers is easy for me. The waypoint system could be improved, but is largely fairly easy for me to work with. The dialogue system is easy for me to work with. Interaction system is easy for me to work with. I've started working on a cutscene system too, which is still in its pretty basic form, but that is shaping up to, again, be fairly easy for me to work with. It will have like the ability for me to add a lot of custom behaviors if I need to, which should hopefully give me a lot of freedom in terms of what I want to do. So anyway, this is a pretty decent start to the foundation of the game. I think I've got a lot of the core systems sort of working. And overall, I'm really, really happy with the progress that I made this month, even though things fell off a little bit towards the end. Despite, the interruptions to my schedules, I was still able to make a lot of progress, and I'm really happy with that. And I want to say a big thank you to everyone who's hung out with me on stream, giving me energy to the stream as well. I really enjoy that. And if you would like to hang out and watch this kind of work in progress, you can do so every Tuesday and Thursday on twitch.tv/gemballs. Right now, all the art in the game is just random test shit, apart from Frutchy's amazing sprite. Thank you very much, Frutchy. But everything else is just random stuff that I've just put together just to test some stuff. But I'm now nearing a point in the game's development that I feel like I need to start prioritizing other aspects of the game, like the level design, like the art, and like the writing, and then start implementing those things in order to inform me about what other needs the game might need. I think if I continue with programming at this point, I run the risk of making a bunch of assumptions about the game that aren't true, or working on things that just aren't necessary. And so I think I need to start straying away a little bit from programming and start moving more towards art, level design, and writing, so that I have a better idea. So I have more of those questions, more of those unknowns about the game answered before I start working on more systems. I think you need to tend to everything at the same time. Usually when you're a team of people, you have different people tending to those things, but it's just me. And so I'm gonna have to keep switching gears. And so I'm thinking that maybe over the next month, I might be doing a bit more like art streams, hopefully level design if we get to it. Maybe even writing streams, but I wouldn't be showing the writing on stream. I'd just hang with you and you'll just see my focused face. I don't know. We'll see. I'm going to do whatever I need to do to make my game. Okay. If you're still here at this point, thank you very much for watching the video. I hope you enjoyed it. I hope you found it interesting. If there's anything that I talked about that you would like a bit more of a deep dive in, I can do that as well. There are a few things that I do want to make a bit of a deep dive on already. But I'm curious to see what you're most interested in. So let me know if you have any questions or anything down below. So far, I'm really enjoying using Godot, and the streaming and everything has been a lot of fun. So thank you everyone for all your support, keeping me going. It's been fun so far. Let's keep having fun. Let's keep being productive. And let's see where this game goes. Thanks for watching, everyone. Take care. Bye-bye.